So, Rajiv, digital services are kind of having a moment in government right now. It's one of the top focuses, the top priorities for CIOs, CTOs, folks like yourself across the entire community. Tell me a little bit about New York's approach to digital services and what's top of mind for you right now.
So, Jake, you're 100% right. The pandemic has taught us that there is an expectation now that digital services is here to stay. So we are starting to rethink some of how services delivered to New Yorkers, how they're delivered, and what's the best way to do that. So obviously, there's going to be some applications and some systems that absolutely cannot go there, and that will physically require folks to be present for that service. But for the most part, everybody's taken a long, strong, hard look at options to change how we deliver those services, how we reduce friction in that space, so that citizens are able to leverage these services through digital channels like be it a phone or an iPad versus the traditional walk into a brick and mortar space and conduct your business. So be it the DMV or be it unemployment or health and human services, we're looking at all of them right now.
And when you're making those decisions, right? Obviously, you're starting at so much needs to be digitized. So when you're looking across the landscape, how are you making the decisions about what to prioritize, what to digitize when, and how to roll that out?
So we're prioritizing it a little differently, right? So we cannot be disruptive in this space. We have to continue to deliver services while you try to transform to this new medium or this new channel. So the best way to really try that out would be to take those services that are within that time period where they are in use. For example, people are buying state park passes now. So what are the opportunities? How do we open that channel up? And is there a way to do that differently and better? So we're looking at those as we go through the seasons to see how do we bring new services in or new channels for those services without disrupting those transactions, because the last thing you want to do is deny somebody the ability to conduct business with the state, but at the same time try to inject the new channels in and see if that that can take off in a way there's adoption and not disruption.
One of the things that people say a lot in this space is that we're building the plane while we're flying it, and that's a good example of what you're talking about. But when you think about services, right, there are so many other competing priorities that you have going on as a CTO. So take something like modernization. When you're looking at digital services, right, there's a big modernization component to that.
Yeah.
But how are you making sure all these things are being done in lockstep together?
So where there's a modernization project already underway, we are taking a quick pause to make sure that we are accounting for lessons learned during the pandemic, and we're making sure that we are delivering services in the way it's expected going forward. One. On the other side, not every application is going to get modernized, but certainly there are ways to bring the delivery of those services through this new medium as well. So you don't have to rewrite the whole application, but the presentation layer and the delivery could be adopted, could be modified to account for a digital service, or at least a look and feel of a digital service. So not everything is going to get rewritten. Some are just going to be delivered differently versus a rewrite or a full transformation.
And when you're looking at these digital services, I mean, what are some of the components that are going into that rethink, that modernization? I mean, there's obviously the presentation piece of the digital services, how people interact with them. Yeah. But then there are things like identity. There are things like, is it in the cloud? Is it in the data center? How are you making those decisions? What are some of the thought processes that you're having as you're doing
so
that?
You hit on the topic. Identity is going to be critical. As you open that up and you're not physically there versus you're doing this over through a device like an iPhone or an iPad or a computer, identity becomes critical. Knowing who your customer is and who your citizen is, and then making sure that the appropriate transactions are conducted, identity becomes core. It becomes an anchor for digital. So the state's undertaken an effort to rationalize ID and then to try to improve the ID proofing level of the citizen account, so we have a certain degree of confidence into who that person is, get those identity services to a place of maturity where MFA becomes a thing. So as we start to introduce these services, we want to start to inject a more mature identity platform along with it, so that we absolutely are certain that we're delivering services to the right people.
And how do, identity projects like what you're talking about, how does that all fit in with sort of, I mean, you've been at ITS for a decent amount of time. How does that fit in with sort of the trajectory that the office has been on, from the last couple of years to this present moment?
Great question. So identity was always on our roadmap. The need to digitize has accelerated the need to complete the identity project to provide frictionless services or improve delivery of services so there's less friction in how you get to that service, and then also to prevent fraudulent. We've seen that during the pandemic. There's a lot of horrific stories about how people gamed systems and things like that. So that certainly was an eye-opener in terms of identity needs to be stronger. There's been a lot of push advocate for MFA, but we got to be careful. Turning on MFA is easy. Check a box and you say MFA is on, but at what risk? We've got to factor in the equity component. You cannot say MFA and then everybody's going to be able to use it. What happens to those that cannot leverage those channels that MFA is delivered on? Do they then not get the service? That's not the mission, right? The mission really is to deliver state services. So be pragmatic, make sure we absolutely are doing no harm in our strong desire to improve our security posture. We cannot then have no options available for those that don't avail of those services in those channels. So equity becomes an important design component in what we do. And so, yes, we'll be moving forward in that direction, but we also will have options for those that don't use those channels, so we don't deny them services.
And I think the equity piece is a good segue. I mean, probably the most prominent and public digital service that New York has worked on over the last couple of years has been Excelsior Pass. What did you learn from that project that you're now, baking into the strategies that you take toward digital services?
Excellent question. So on the Excelsior wallet, it took us a while to get it fine-tuned to where people could actually get those records. These are your immunization records, and so absolutely it was paramount that we were making sure we were giving the right record to the right individual. So what that clearly showed to us is that our data structures need to be really good. We need to have good, solid data about the program as well as the citizen in terms of being able to match those things. And identity, of course, wherever we have a good identity system, we could easily start to match those records against that. So this desire to digitize is great, the urgency is there, but it needs to be anchored with identity and strong program and a good data set. Not having information, for example, if the system has your information but has no cell phone number or a SMS option, how do I invoke MFA? So that's a small example of the data quality. It's highly important that we have a good data set before we start to say we're going to put these controls in, because you could put the controls in, not have the data, and then you'll be starting to deny people availability of that service. So great question. Those are some of the lessons we learned, and so great amount of work goes into making sure before we turn something on, the data is robust.
And last question on data. I mean, data is also having a moment right now, right? We've seen the rise of the chief data officer. Yeah. We've seen the rise of sort of that shift from open data to now using data for things like machine learning and RPA. When you're looking at the challenge that data presents in this context, what are you doing to make stuff happen and to get everything in line so that you can execute quicker?
So first off, let me touch on the Chief Data Officer. New York is going to be announcing a Chief Data Officer shortly. It's in its final stages of getting finalized. So yes, the one thing I learned from the 2 years through the pandemic was, with good data, we could go that much faster in terms of delivering services and making sure we got the maximum outreach with that data. So not only for delivery of services, in terms of automation, having good data, it helps us, deliver consistent back office processes and things like that. Having good data, now let's just take data in the sense of security telemetry. Having that allows us to react and focus on areas where we need to focus on from a cyber perspective as well. So data is an underlying foundational thing. Without good data, you're kind of handicapped in delivering quality services.